evening. This is Yana Benoon and Steve Benoon from Israeli News Live, and we welcome in our studio Deborah Tavares from StopTheCrime.net. Welcome, Deborah.
Well, Yana, thank you so much for inviting me to clarify this Ventura County, California apartment building lockdown that everyone was looking at the reporting on this and
Right.
how people were literally locked down in their apartments by the health officer and by the manager of the apartment complex.
Yes, and you have done some investigation on this, so we've been looking forward to results of your investigation. And also, please tell us what is really and truly behind this incident.
Well, I will, because it's reported what happened, okay? The building was locked down. It was a combination of actions between the building, which is a housing authority building. It's under a contractual agreement under the corporate structure. And I'll explain that in a little more detail in a moment. But certainly it was infuriating to people that read what was happening to these people, that they would have guards posted so they couldn't depart from the building. They would have to quarantine whether they were COVID or not, and that all the key cards would be deactivated during the lockdown. And anybody that would read that letter would think, this is outrageous. This can't happen in America. Well, it has been happening in America, and it is sadly statutory rules and regulations that has allowed this. America has been taken. And what do I mean by that? It's harsh. And I would say, Yana, we've talked before, and the most difficult reality for me was to understand that the local, county, federal, and state governments aren't real, and that they're all privately owned corporations called governments. Now, I did not understand that. The level of programming and indoctrination in school had me believing there were branches of government that we could vote. And I honestly believed that to be the case. I never understood that judges were all privately employed administrators called judges, and that law is nothing more than their corporate statute and regulations. So let's talk about this Ventura complex looking like it's a siege. It's all legal. Now, it's important to understand, again, this is an apartment complex that houses disabled people, and they're under rules, statutory rules under the housing authority. Now, anyone can type in, as I did, the U.S. Housing Authority, Climate Action Plans, or Sustainable Development. And you will read the requirements that we face under sustainable development. All these agencies are corporations, and we're going to talk about that because I didn't know before I found out, and when I found out, I will tell you, I had PTSD. The enormity of understanding this was large, very large, and extremely painful. I could not believe the degree of deception and lies and all of the deceit through the media and our educational system. And I never understood that our government was just another corporation listed on Dun & Bradstreet, USA Inc., doing business. And in fact, I didn't understand, and it didn't make sense. I was hearing about problems across the board with many government agencies, and I'll just name a few. It's USA Inc., and all these agencies are a collective group of agencies that have taken this country over, and in fact, the world. So let's talk about what we have here in the United States, and this is just a small list. The USDA is a corporate agency. FEMA is a corporate agency. NIST, N-I-S-T, NASA, the EPA, the FTC, the CDC, and I've talked about the CDC in prior programs, that the CDC is listed on Dun & Bradstreet. It's doing business, and its business is vaccines. The FCC, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Defense is a corporation doing business, and DARPA, the BLM, which is the Bureau of Land Management, the FAA, HUD, FCA, FDA, DOE, that's the Department of Energy, the CIA, and there are hundreds and hundreds of more agencies that have taken over this country at every level. And it was years of going to local city council meetings, board of supervisors meetings, driving to San Francisco to go to California Public Utility Commission. I did not realize then that all the utilities were operated by Rothschild. But what wasn't making sense is that the cities weren't listening to us. There would be maybe 100 people or more, dependent on what the topic might be. For example, fluoridation was one. And I remember, well over 100 people attended that meeting to try to tell the Board of Supervisors they did not want fluoridated water. And after all of this public appealing to the board voted unanimously to fluoridate the water supply. Now, as it turned out, the only way they weren't able to here was because our water supply was a combination of many different water wells, and they weren't able to uniformly disperse the fluoride evenly. So our water was never fluoridated, but it was not because the Board of Supervisors didn't want the water fluoridated. Again, all of these agencies run on autopilot with policies that run through all of our cities all the time. Your city manager is involved, and all of your believedly elected city officers and the Board of Supervisors and city council members, and your public health, we've talked about that. The public health department is also a private corporation. Now, what I did back in the early days of learning about this, I actually went on and searched on Dun & Bradstreet a number of different corporate agencies, and I searched my city, the city of Sebastopol, and sure enough, I found them listed as a corporation, and I was stunned. And I then also went to the city because I wanted to find out what was the game around public comment, because depending on how many people wanted to speak on an issue, Yana, that was on the calendar for that evening, you might get 3 minutes maximum to speak, or you might get 2 minutes if there were many people that wanted to speak, or maybe even only 1 minute. And that was the case often when we'd drive all the way to San Francisco, pay that expensive parking, and then be given 1 minute to speak. 1 minute. And I just couldn't understand why. And if somebody spoke over the time allotted, I have seen many arrests where people that passionately, Yana, were trying to deliver something really important, and they were so frustrated that they weren't being listened to, and they just wanted to say a few more paragraphs to complete their delivery to who they thought would be certain to represent them. And I saw more often people under either the threat of arrest, or I've seen arrest itself. And I kept thinking, well, what is this? So I went down and I pulled a local public input policy from my town. And everyone listening, you can do this too in your town. And it's called Public Input at My City, the name of my city. And it says, it is the general policy of the city council to allow public to speak on each item listed on the city council agenda, as each agenda item is called. And it says, at all times when there is public input, it is the policy of the city that they receive information from the public. It is not the intention of the members of the city or the council to advocate a position on way or another on a particular item until after completion of the public input. The council will not debate or respond to public questions. So that pretty much encapsulated why the illusion of public comment. To keep us in the illusion of a government that is operating on sustainable development goals issued by the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and secret families. In fact, I'll go over the corporate aspect because, again, I didn't know that we were operated by a corporate system. And I use this quote often, and it really applies here. We'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when absolutely everything the people believe is false. And that's William Casey, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1981, when everything we believe is false, and that's what's occurred. It says, and I'd like to discuss, because many people recognize that lobbyists for major corporations seem to control Washington, but few people know that Washington, D.C. is a corporation. And the so-called federal government is actually the mother corporation of a vast network of state and local governments and governmental agencies that is actually a franchise system. Now, many people listening, Yana, may not understand what this means, because just the concept itself that we're USA Inc., in fact, we are actually even Earth Inc. Earth Inc. But to understand what our government really is, we have to look at history. That is not in our history books and was never taught to us in school. Certainly it wasn't to me. And did you know that the original organic constitution of 1787 was hijacked just after the Civil War?
I heard about that, yeah.
Yeah. People don't really realize what that means. And then did you know that the federal government went bankrupt in the 30s? 1933, it went bankrupt.
Right.
Was collateralized.
Yeah.
And then in 1871, February 21st of 1871, Congress passed an act to provide a government for the District of Columbia, also known as the Act of 1871, with no constitutional authority to do this. Congress created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia, a 10 square mile parcel of land, known, of course, as, Washington, D.C. And there are three capitals in this world. There's the Vatican, and there is the Rothschild Bankers 1 square mile in London, and then there is Washington, D.C. They have separate zip codes, and they function separately. They don't pay taxes. And the United States was granted corporations the right of persons in a flurry of lawsuits by corporations shortly after the end of Civil War. And USA Inc. turned control of credit and currency over to the same international bankers by passing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, an initiated taxation scheme on the people via the 16th Amendment. I could go on and on. I think it's just important for people to see what is happening now. Now, I still have friends that are out there as activists speaking about all of the pushback against human beings that we're now seeing, and it's going to massively increase, massively. And I still hear people saying, well, you just need to elect change. I hear that constantly, not only in Washington, D.C., but state governments as well as local and county governments. In fact, there's a petition right now to try to force our governor of California out of office. And people actually really believe that they can push him out of office. He's part of the corporate structure. And even worse, he's part of the secret society. And I think what's important for people to understand is the context of how this occurred to all of us. And when we see the verbiage in what occurred at that apartment structure, and you, again, type in any of these corporate agencies that I've listed, the USDA, the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, DARPA, any of these followed on the same search line with sustainable development or climate action, you find they all support climate action plans or sustainable development plans. And these are genocidal policies of reducing CO2 emissions to net zero by 2050. We aren't on this planet to have net zero CO2 emissions or reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. And I've read many documents out of the White House that discuss this in prior shows that I've discussed. But it's important to understand that we have been so deceived. We have absolutely been so deceived. I want to invite everyone that's listening to just do your own homework a little bit here. Don't believe me, because it's hard to believe what you're hearing me say. It was for me. And if I heard somebody saying what I hear myself saying to all of you right now, when I wasn't ready to understand it, I didn't understand it, and I didn't follow it. It was foreign. The words were foreign, even though I was hearing that we don't have a government. It was foreign to my ears. I really could not understand that. And I didn't understand what statutory laws meant either, because what I didn't know is all the laws created by these corporations are private corporation regulations called public law, statutes, or codes, and ordinances to conceal their true nature. Well, what was that? I didn't know what that was. But what I did come to understand is that we have all been indoctrinated through expert programming, conditioning, prejudice, and patriotism to treat information like this as being ridiculous, absurd, and untrue. And we have no more time to believe that our corporate structure is not in control completely, because we are being dissolved as a country.
Yes.
We are losing what we thought we had, completely losing.
Well, you have just described complete corporate takeover, corporate fascism. So
Yes.
What happened in Ventura County, it's not that it's legal, it's just that they legalized it by passing laws behind our backs, right?
And yes, and you know, people will say, well, it's your fault. You didn't participate in government. Well, again, I have a friend, and I can't remember if I mentioned this already or not. Please stop me if I did. Who was the mayor of Nevada City in California. Nevada City is about an hour away from the town of Paradise that burned down almost completely in 2018. And we know the mayor of Nevada City. In fact, she watches our videos. We've been to see her, and she was leading that city into understanding that COVID was a lie. She was telling the local businesses not to close up. She was telling people to look at what COVID really is. And they sent in mercenaries to that city. It's a darling old gold town with these beautiful old Victorian homes. It's a small town. It's situated in forests, which are, majority of the trees are dead because of the overhead aerial chemtrailing programs. And they know that. Most of these people have been digging in to fighting the fires for themselves. But I won't digress. She was fighting to keep her city out of this. And when the mercenaries came into the city and were literally bullying the store owners and telling them they had to close up and they couldn't stay open. And then there were many threats to her life. And she just resigned last week as mayor of Nevada City.
How sad.
Now, I just received a text today from a restaurant owner in another nearby city saying that the Board of Supervisors there is going to impose health order violations, COVID health order violations by businesses. If you serve indoors and you don't serve outdoors. Now, this restaurant owner was feeling that he had rights and that the city could not do this to him. And next week they're imposing fines, and the fines will be between $500 and $10,000 if they get fined for violating health orders. Now, keeping in mind, and I'll say this again, this is most important because we all face this right now and we're all hearing this right now. It's important to understand that the CDC is a private for-profit corporation doing business. It's not a health advocacy group or organization, as we believe that it is. It is not. It's a corporation. Again, it's listed on Dun & Bradstreet and headquartered in the state of Georgia. And the CDC, of course, has very strong ties and allegiance to the pharmaceutical industry, you think? Vaccines, because that is the business of the CDC, is vaccines. And in fact, I investigated our public health officer here in Sonoma County, who came right out of the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the CDC. And their recommendations to lock down our cities, to watch businesses collapse, is all influenced on their fiscal health of their corporation, because they're doing business.
And they're about to lock everything down second time again, which will be permanent lockdown. Well, basically, Deborah, you described, as I said, corporate takeover. United States being a corporation, being bankrupt, is dissolving. And
yes,
I guess because of Agenda 2030, 2021-2030 of sustainable development, which is a genocidal agenda, as you have described so many times for us, they're ready to genocide this nation by whatever means deemed necessary. What would
they
you...
are genociding us every day. I mean, we're being sprayed with chemtrails, and people say, well, you know, what's that all about? You know, that's about heavy metals, strontium, barium. It's creating high combustibility of all of the trees that they're killing, so that the fires combust.
And
I tell people, Yana, they're not spraying vitamins on us.
No, and they're not going to inject vitamins with the vaccines they're preparing either. And
that's right.
And I don't know if you're aware that Bill Gates have said this is going to be a perpetual vaccinations. This is not just one vaccine as people had in mind. This is perpetual.
Oh, we need boosters on a regular basis.
Yes, that's going to be like a way of life. He said COVID is never going to go away. We're going to need perpetual vaccination. So imagine that: lockdowns, masks, social distancing, perpetual vaccinations as a way of life. That's impossible to live a life like that. Completely impossible. What would you advise to people to do?
Well, I would first advise for people to understand what reality is. Oftentimes, I've said it's reality, not illusion or delusion, that will determine what our future will be. And we need to understand reality and stop living in the disinformation that we learned in school. We know that Rockefeller was very much involved in dumbing down our school system from the very beginning. And we are just considered stakes on the table. We're considered worthless, valueless, useless eaters. And many people have heard this. You can read Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. It's only about a 43 or 45-page document. You can just get it online and read it. I would recommend everybody listen to this recommendation. Download Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars and read it. There are many books I could recommend, Yana, but I think that what people are hearing me say right now is horrific. It would have been for me if I still thought that I could vote in a new president coming up in the election. And I really didn't know until I knew.
Right.
And I have a video up. It's called Who's Running America and the CAP. Who's Running America and the CAP, C-A-P. And that's short for Climate Action Plan. You can go and listen to that video. I will tell you that a very dear friend of mine, really, she and I worked together in this understanding that we didn't have a government. It was painful. And she's a mom like we are, Yana, and she was just very, very heartbroken, as I have been as well. And she died unexplainedly about a year ago. And why I'm saying this about her is she and I discussed the PowerPoint presentation together that I delivered in that video that's called Who's Running America and the CAP, C-A-P, Climate Action Plan. So I want to just honor Anita, who worked tirelessly like we are to get the truth out, and she is no longer with us, but she's certainly there with her work, and I want to value that because we stand on the shoulders of many people before us that have tried desperately to tell us the truth about this country, and yet we continuously get dosed daily by the radio, by the television, by the print media into believing an illusion of reality. And that's choices we are making. And we would never have agreed to any of this.
Right.
It was always kept in the dark. And today we find ourselves unwittingly contracting contractual agreements with a completely corrupt corporate franchise system that doesn't represent our best interest. In fact, has murderous documents that they have adopted through all of our towns everywhere. And so the CIA, quote, everything that we believe will be false, it's come to pass. Because everything that most people believe is indeed false.
Yes.
So, again, the story out of Ventura is a developing story for many to understand the reality of what that really means. And it is, as I said, a housing authority apartment project, and you can type that in, U.S. Housing Authority and Sustainable Development, and you will read that they're in lockstep, as are every branch of our military, Yana, every single branch of the military, even the U.S. Bar Association. All the banks right now, all of them are saying there will be no more lending loans unless it is sustainable development based. And we're being taken over stealthily because, and I won't say that it's our fault, it really has not been our fault. This has been deception. This has been the highest level of deception and indoctrination. And what I think I see now, Yana, is a widening understanding that things aren't right, things are getting more difficult every day. The self-imposed isolation and torture that we're now in this lockdown, even though we have some loosening up here in Sonoma County, our corporate health director, right out of the WHO and the CDC, is saying, well, you're still to shelter in place and not go out. Don't go out unless you have to. And really, she's also saying don't have groups of even more than 10. That's too many people. And so masks are becoming part of our daily outfit and required when masks are dangerous. And I have a video I just released. It's up on stopthecrime.net. I would invite everybody to take a listen to it. It is entitled something like July 2020 Deborah Tavares reports. And I go through a litany of directed energy weapons and mind control weapons systems that have been used on all of us. So it is no wonder that this corporate structure has so stealthily positioned itself to take away everything we believed we had and didn't. And what we see, quite frankly, is the industrialized nations of this world are being taken down quickly because they're claiming that we're the biggest polluters. Well, no, it's that we were deceived the most.
Correct.
We were deceived the most. The United States was sold with the idea that we're the shining light on the hill. We were held up on a pedestal to the rest of the world. We have people from South America with their families walking for months to get to the border of the United States. And what happens to these kids of these families? They're separated from their families.
Right.
Just like they can do with COVID, right? I mean, they can take the kids away from the families if the families don't have enough square footage of their home or enough bathrooms to self-isolate or quarantine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we're watching the final solution, basically. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Complete takeover and dissolving of our nation, taking all of our rights and enslaving us completely, and taking all of our resources, and they will completely take everything because on their Agenda 2030, Deborah, as you well know, even owning private property and inheritance laws, this is all considered immoral under this New World Order laws, you know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Now, people are going to hear you and I saying this. And for those that haven't walked down this painful road, it's going to sound crazy. And I can understand that, Yana, because when I heard this too, I just couldn't imagine it. The enormity of even wrapping my head around it was too big. And those days that I started to really see it, particularly from my history of going to meetings. In fact, I invite everybody to go to stopthecrime.net. Scroll through my video YouTube channel and take a look at some of the 3 and 4 minute videos you will see. Many of those are meetings that I go to, and I will stand up and I will tell everybody, including the city council or the county board of supervisor, that they are a corporation. I would invite everybody to see what I had been doing over the past many years. I think it's also very important for everyone that's listening to understand the network of secret societies that your cities have adopted policies that they've underwritten. And I was looking through some documents that I have piles of in my war room, and I came across this document, and I would presume that this is a document that's in every town. And it's called Next Economy Project, and it is entitled Report and Action Plan. Now, I opened this up because I had printed it out. This is dated April of 2015. And it's the Economic Development Board that sits in our city and our county and sits likely in your county and city as well. I was stunned to find out who was involved in this, who put the money forward, and I'll invite every single one of you to investigate who the Morgan Family Foundation is. And I discovered many different entities that underwrite the policies. You can go down, well, you could at least go down to your building department or your city staff office or some office that are pretty much closed now, and you could pull documents that they've approved, and you'll find that, as I did, our city is doing business with Ernst & Young. That's an accounting firm out of London. That's Rothschild. In fact, I have a video up there, Yana, and I would certainly recommend everybody find it on stopthecrime.net. It's called Ernst & Young and the Accounting Fraud or something along that line. When I read in the newspaper after our 2017 fires here in Northern California that the city had paid well over $1 million to hire this London-based accounting firm, I looked into it and I found out that they were creating revenue off of sustainable development. And what that means is they were creating revenue off of our reefs, our coral reefs along our Northern County coastline here because of the human degrading that has occurred from too much greenhouse gas emissions. They're charging their revenue on, they call it transvaporation, and that's on farm grazing lands where cattle graze and they eat the grass, but there is an evaporation factor of the water from the grass. And they're looking to capture that water loss and charge the ranchers for that. But what stunned me most, and there are many other aspects of new revenue to tax all of us. What stunned me the most was they said they would be taxing us for air. Air.
Wow.
A-I-R. Air. And I have the documents under that video that you can take a look at for yourself. We're a corporation. We are operating under corporate statutes and rules and regulations. We're hiring international banking cartels to run this country down to our local cities. So when you look at your climate action plan, for example, everyone that's listening, type in the name of your city or the name of your state, and on the same search line, say, for example, Georgia, you would type in Georgia, climate action plans, and you can also type in sustainable development. And voila, it will appear. And you can search a number of various documents. I would look for PDF documents that have been adopted. And I would look at the beginning of these documents and see who has been responsible and who has been underwriting these. Because as we investigated this over the years, we found international consulting firms, international bankers were rolling all of this out over every single one of us in every single city. And your illusion of a voted representatives in your county board of supervisors, when they take an oath of office, they're not taking the oath to what we perceive as a constitution. They're taking the oath to the corporation. And they pass the corporate policies. They all sign off on it. In fact, this one document I just mentioned to you right now, the Next Economy Project, it's unbelievable what it says in here. It talks about reducing water. It says water availability will continue to be an issue, both for quality and quantity, and that changing weather patterns will continue to have implications for local agriculture-based economy. They control the weather. Okay, let's be very clear on that. The weather is controlled.
Right.
These fires that we're having could be put out, Yana, and they're not putting these fires out. They're starting the fires.
That's right.
They go on to say that regulatory enhancements will soon broaden the scope of monitoring to private sources. And it says, the USGS, that underscore them as a horrific corporate structure, because the USGS, I've just been looking at some of their most current discussions on weather. They're talking about earthquakes. Now, everybody should know by now that earthquakes can and are induced. And right now they're talking about a variety of earthquakes. So what we see across the board is scenario planning. Everything's laid out. You can go get copies or download them easily from the internet on each of your cities. You've been scammed, you've been shammed, and these documents are genocidal documents.
Yeah.
Genocidal documents.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yes,
And just like you have explained, this post-COVID world, they're going to ration food and water and resources, and people cannot possibly survive on what their plans are. I mean, like you said, yeah.
Yeah, that's true, Yana. And beyond the rationing of water, what is happening here in the United States by executive order is they're building, I don't know how many wastewater treatment plants, but they're being built right now in the millions and billions of dollars throughout this country. And that's to recycle water. We're talking toilet to tap.
Yes.
We're talking water treatment. And they're saying that it won't matter if there's a drought or an extended lack of rain. We'll always have water when we drink our poop and our urine. And of course, it's all seasoned by pharmaceuticals of emerging contaminant concerns, right?
Yeah, it's unreal. People need to be educated like this, and most people still don't understand what sustainable development is, what Agenda 2030 truly means in simple words. Because when they read, like when you search for it, like I did the other day, it all is wrapped up in a beautiful wording, Deborah. It's like all for our benefit. Everything is going to be great. It's also to solve the hunger, It's to solve the water shortages. Yet people don't understand what's all behind it.
Well, sadly, they don't. And I can only say it took me many years to get to where I understand the level that I now understand and more. We don't have that kind of time. We have to learn quickly what we don't know.
Right.
We need to.
We ran out of time. Yes. We have no time no more.
Yeah, we really don't. And we need to take whatever actions we can to survive this point. Because when you read these plans and you read that we're going to have multiple massive 100-year storms and other weather events in a few months, which is what is going to be happening.
Yes.
You have to look around at your surrounding. Do you have large trees that are going to fall on your home? Do you need to reduce the wind load of these trees? Remove branches because the winds are increasing. They're using all of this. Plus, the trees are already declining. Most and many are already dead. Yeah. Which is why we were observing after the fires here that the trees were burning from the inside out. And much to my shock, but thankfully from Rosalind Peterson, who died a few years ago, she worked for the USDA for years, and she was involved in investigating crop failures, why crops would fail. And she would go to the lab and work with the lab on crop failures, and suddenly it occurred to her one day that it was in the air. The failures were being caused in the atmosphere. And that's when she fell into the control of the weather. And bless her heart, she tried and worked for years. And she even went to the United Nations at her expense and pleaded and fought that they would listen to her, that they were there for our goodwill, right? They're not. Mm-hmm. And she tried to explain to them to please stop the weather that is occurring now. It's just destroying our food supply because she comes from the USDA. And she died a few years ago, sadly. But she was a mentor of mine, thankfully. Mm-hmm. And she taught me about geoengineering. I didn't know anything about weather control. When I fell into this, I just kept falling. And sadly, I haven't stopped falling. It's been a very lonely, difficult immersion into documents because I was so extremely skeptical, always skeptical. I mean, I want truth and I want facts, and I need to find it basically in the documents as evidence-based. That's how I need to prove it to myself.
Yes.
And And I'm a very committed person to my work ethic, being self-employed with my husband for over 30 years in land development. I've been married 49 years.
Yes, and you are indeed.
Person.
Yes, you are very committed. And I know that this has been more than impromptu now. So I certainly don't want to take up no more of your time. But thank you. And I want all the listeners, please go to stopthecrime.net and also Stop the Crime YouTube, right? Stop the Crime.
Yeah, well, yes, stopthecrime.net, and then our website will open up and you can click on our YouTube video channel. You'll see it. And then subscribe and hit the bell notification. You'll receive information as we post things. We don't overly post, so you won't constantly be hearing little bells dinging. But we also run the website called primarywater.org, and that is exceedingly important. We now must, while we're literally confined in our homes, imprisoned in our homes, we must learn the truth. Spend the time learning the truth. Stop with the video games, stop with the movies, start reading, and start teaching your children the truth. Sadly, many of the kids that are not in school right now have been already indoctrinated into the Green New Deal. They really truly believe that the earth as we have known it is going to end in about 10 years or less. The kids are horrified, and they're blaming all the older generations for this mess that they are now going to have to try to survive in, and likely will not survive in. This is not at all reality for our kids. Our kids are certainly becoming very lonely. I read a marquee on a closed down school. It said, "We miss you. Alone together. Together alone."
Isn't that sad? That's the saddest thing ever.
It was so sad. Yeah. We miss you. Together alone. We're all together alone. And we're going to be made more isolated. Soon we're going to have difficulty even communicating, as there is more difficulty with the internet. We're told in the Rockefeller Foundation document that many systems that we've grown and have become reliable on will fail. Many systems will fail, including our electrical grid.
This is part of torture. It's all pre-planned because they're breaking us down as humans. You know, they want to break our humanity, change our species through transhumanism. So this is the plan of the evil that's here, and we really do need to learn. And Deborah, I want to thank you for your dedicated work that you do, everything you do for humanity. I thank you, and please, I encourage listeners, again, go to stopthecrime.net, primarywater.org, support Deborah's work, please. She's working tirelessly and sharing with us this important information. I am really eternally thankful to you, Deborah, for everything.
And I to you as well, Yana. And all of you that are listening, please learn the truth while you still can, and share it far and wide, and teach your children. Teach your children.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Yana, for inviting me today.
You're welcome, and thank you all for listening, and you all have a good night.